everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us on this Monday evening. We're really excited to be here with tonight's wonderful guests. My name is Amali, and I'm the events director here at Books Are Magic. We are so excited to have all of you here with us to celebrate and discuss writing dark and surrealist fiction with Molly McGhee, author of Jonathan Abernathy, Your Kind, and London Writers Salon's Matt Trinetti and Lindsay Track-Hughes. Before we get into all of that, though, I just have a few quick housekeeping notes to get out of the way. We will be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end of the discussion, so please start thinking of questions to ask and hold on to them. After the talk, Molly will be around to sign and personalize your books. That will be happening in the alcove next to where you checked in. We'll let you know where and when to start lining up for that. And lastly, if you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we would love to encourage you to buy a copy of Jonathan Abernathy, Your Kind online using the link in the live stream description. Now, a bit about tonight's guests. Molly McGhee is from a cluster of unincorporated towns outside of Nashville, Tennessee. She completed her MFA in fiction at Columbia University, where in addition to receiving a Chance Fellowship, she taught in the undergraduate creative writing department. She has worked in the editorial departments of McSweeney's, The Believer, Noon, Fur, Strauss, and Giroux, I can never say the name of that place, and Tor. Currently living in Brooklyn, her work has appeared in the Paris Review. Matt Trinetti is a co-founder of the London Writers Salon and the Webby-nominated Writers Hour daily writing session, and host of the London Writers Salon podcast. Each week at London Writers Salon, Matt interviews a writer about the craft of writing, the art of building a writing career, and the reality of navigating the creative world. He also writes on Seeking. And lastly, we have Lindsay Track-Hughes, who is a writer and editor, a former columnist at Catapult, RIP. Her essays have appeared in The Rumpus, Bright Wall Dark Room, The Audacity, and elsewhere. She is head of programming at the London Writers Salon and assistant books editor at Barrel House. She writes creative nonfiction on Substack at Fox in the Dark. And lastly, just a bit about London Writers Salon, tonight's co-host. London Writers Salon is on a mission to help people realize their creative potential through writing. They provide a home for writers around the world to grow a writing practice, refine their craft, build creative lives, and find creative friends. They do this through daily Writers Hour live writing sessions, expert workshops, courses and interviews, and a supportive creative community. You can learn more about them at londonwriterssalon.com. Okay, that is all for me. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to tonight's guests. Thank you all.
Hello and welcome everyone. So as Amali did such a great job. So I'm Matt, one of the co-founders of the London Writers Salon. I'm joined today by Lindsay, and Lindsay's local here in Brooklyn.
This is really special for me because this is my local bookshop, which has been really formative for me as a reader and a writer. So I'm very excited about this.
And I have to apologize because neither of us were called London Writers Salon, but neither of us are bringing the sexy British accent. So I apologize. So London Writers Salon, I used to live in London, and my co-founder and I, Parl is there. She might be watching, so hi, Parl. Parl's British. We started this together in London, and it existed as a series like this, and then the pandemic happened, and largely these events happen virtually. And so each week we invite to the salon a writer that we admire, this week, and today it's Molly, to talk about the craft of writing, the art of building a writing career. We publish these later on our podcast, that Amali said. Yeah, so this is really special. We typically are doing these virtually, so we're so happy. Thank you to Books Are Magic for helping make this happen. Yeah, we're just so happy to be here. And also the special thing is that Molly's book has been out in the U.S. for about 6 months or so, 5 or 6 months? Since October. And last month it was published in the UK. So we thought this would be a really nice transatlantic thing. So all of our friends who are in the UK across the pond watching live or watching the live stream after, hello and thanks for being here. So typically our angle for these interviews are for writers. And so I'm just curious, how many people are writers here in the room? And writers in all sense, like you don't have to be published, you can be someone who writes.
Nice.
Amazing.
People.
Wonderful. And if you're writing curious, that's cool too, like welcome. So a lot of our questions will be geared toward writers, and we had a chat beforehand, so we're gonna be honest here, and Molly is gonna share her experience as well. So those are what our questions are going to be about. All right. Well, let's time to dig in.
Let's go.
Wow.
So we loved this book and we are so excited to dive into the craft, but we want to back up a little bit. You grew up outside of Nashville, so we want to know what your early writing experience was like. What were your first experiences like as a writer?
Is anyone here from the country? Hello. Yeah, there's nothing to do there. And we didn't have Wi-Fi at the time. So for me, when I lived on my dad was sort of, I don't know how to put it so other people can understand, but he was a farm manager for like a cattle farm, and we lived on that farm. And so I spent a lot of time in the fields daydreaming, and I think that's where I sort of started to write. At the time, my chore was bush hogging. Does anyone know what that is? No. Why would you know what that is? You know. Mm-hmm. I'm allergic to grass, which is why it's actually very fun. Bush hogging is like a huge tractor that you attach a really big mower at the end to, and you drive around in circles, and it's the way you mow acreage. So when I got started and interested in stories, I would be on this tractor for like 4 or 5 hours at a time in the sun, deathly allergic to the grass that I was mowing, covered in little hives and daydreaming about sort of these stories that I wanted to tell.
So you went from daydreaming in the fields to getting an MFA at Columbia. So I'm curious about when writing emerged as a path you wanted to consider seriously as a career.
I got really lucky in that both my parents are deep eccentrics, and so I think a lot of people, when they were growing up, they would have these crazy dreams or goals, and their parents would be like, I really need you to be a doctor, actually. My parents were not like that. They were really impressed that I graduated high school. So when I told them that I wanted to be a writer at a very young age, I think probably before I turned 13, they were always very supportive and uplifting, and they brought me to the library twice a week, every week. Yeah. So I would say, for me, it's been like a journey I've been on my whole life, and it's strange to be sitting in front of all of you now.
And speaking, let's turn to the book. So Jonathan Abernathy, You Are Kind, published in October in the US and in February. For those of us, we loved it. For those of us who haven't read it, can you give us a little preview? What's the book about?
It's about a guy who's really down on his luck. My publishers call him a loser, but I made them put that in quotation marks because I don't know if I believe that he's a loser or not. And he has got a massive amount of debt. He's trying to get out of it, and he accepts a job that is offered to him in a dream, where he has to go into the dreams of other people and remove the things that are making them anxious or depressed. Obviously, it's a book, so things go horribly wrong.
What was the initial spark for this book?
I get all my ideas. This is so annoying. I'm so sorry. I get all my ideas through dreams. And when I was in grad school, I was having this reoccurring dream about a young man who was incredibly anxious all the time. And through the course of, I was in fiction workshop with Ben Marcus, who to this day, very scary because I love his work. So I was in a workshop with him and I was like, oh my God, I just want to write something good. And he hated all my stories. He was like, Molly, you could do better. And I was like, oh, you're right. And I was having this dream throughout the workshop experience. And then I finally wrote the dream down right at the very end. And it was the only story I wrote for him that he liked. And so that sort of gave me the courage to keep working on it.
Great. So you wrote that story, he liked it, then at what point did you think, okay, there might be a whole book here versus just some vignette?
For me, I put it in a drawer for a long time because I was working on another novel that I didn't end up publishing. I went out with that novel in 2020, which I don't know if you guys remember 2020, but I went out with my first unpublished novel on the day of the insurrection. So really good luck. And then when I realized the insurrection was happening, I was like, oh, I gotta do something else. And I went through my drawer of manuscripts And strangely, I couldn't find the original story, but that night I started dreaming about it again, and so I started writing it from scratch over.
And then what was the next step after that? Because so many of us, we might have a story that we're interested in, and maybe we write it out like you have, but then to commit to many months to developing this, at what point did that become something bigger?
Yeah, I think the next step is suffering. So you got to commit to pure, unadulterated suffering. I'm a teacher to undergraduate students at Columbia, and something I tell them all the time is that when you start writing, it's kind of like when you start going to the gym, except instead of weightlifting, it's humiliation. So you can only sort of start with 5 pounds of humiliation, and then you got to slowly build up your ability over time. So for me, because I'd been writing for a long time, I knew that the humiliation was going to be part of it. It's very embarrassing, it's very vulnerable, and it never turns out the way you want it the first time. So I had a schedule that I tried to stick to where I was writing a certain amount of generative words a day. And when I say generative words, that means that you have to kind of tell your inner critic to just please be quiet. Like, your generative words are going to be bad. They're going to be upsetting to you. You have taste, so you're like, what is this? Why did I use the 3 times in one sentence? This is the rhythm, the polyrhythm is totally off. Like, this comma makes no sense there. Have I done any schooling at all? So I have a very vocal inner critic. So for me, the first draft is always trying to ignore that inner critic and just get what's inside onto the page. And from there, I do several rounds of honing and perfecting and choosing how I want it to appear, the language that I want, how I want the characters to be. And each draft for me is kind of a different point of focus.
It's interesting, Matt and I were talking before this, and I was saying what a totally pleasurable reading experience this was, even though so much anxiety. But it's interesting to hear that the writing process included much suffering.
Yes. But I want it to be, I don't know about y'all, but I think of myself as a reader first, and I get really mad when I spend $30 on a book and it's mid. I'm like, hello, that's a lot of money for me. So I really wanted the reading experience to feel propulsive, and as an artist, that was really important to me. And so sometimes you hear people talking about propulsive reading experiences, and they usually use terms like plot or character. But for me, it's all about timing. It's like comedy and horror, right? You both are very dependent on how and when the thing is revealed. And that is what creates the suspense. And then comedy, right, is the relief. So for me, getting the timing right was a huge process, a huge part of this book.
We do want to talk about character, though, because
And maybe even plot.
Hey, I like it all.
I don't know how many of you have read the book, but Jonathan, and I'm so glad to hear that you put loser in quotations, because I found Jonathan so endearing, and you write his internal landscape and his struggle with indebtedness with such humanity, and I'm wondering what were your approaches to developing that character, to getting to know him, to learning his fears and his wants?
To me, when I start writing, usually if I'm putting words to the paper, it's the voice that comes first. So I'll get the dreams, I'll have the images, I'll know what happens, but the only thing really that motivates me is sort of the language. And the language that Jonathan uses is really, to me, what drew me to his character. I want to say, not to out myself, but I know a lot of, well, how do I want to put this? It's not really offensive. I grew up on Reddit, you know what I'm saying? And so I know a lot of young men who are of that persuasion, and I love them, right? Like, they're my people, but they're often so lost and struggling in a world that their ancestors were sort of like the tyrants of, right? And so now you have this whole group of people who are coming of age, who are adults, who feel extremely lost, who feel deeply useless, and who are applying sort of 20th century ideas to the 21st century, and it does not work for them. So when I started writing Jonathan Abernathy, that was one of my core motivations, and one of the main things that I wanted to sort of explore is, like, why are these guys labeled losers? It's just like, and what sort of perpetuates this extreme loneliness? I don't know if I captured it or not, but that was sort of the original sort of framework that I was researching and sort of thinking about the language of. Yeah.
And I think I like the way you describe him and how lost he feels. And in a world in which there are many people who would be like, get over it, these are decisions you made, get on with your life, you've managed to create a character that I am so deeply emotionally invested in. And I'm wondering, was that something you were consciously thinking about, trying to keep the reader on Jonathan's side?
Yeah, I'm not really a fan of hateful people. And I guess I would describe myself as like a humanist. I think we all go through really unique, indescribable experiences, especially internal experiences. And it's up to, I grew up religiously. I grew up in the evangelical church. Shout out to my Nana if she's watching. I'm not saying anything about religion right now. But for me, coming to that sort of understanding of like every single person is a person, no matter what they're doing, how they're behaving, and all people, their inner voice, it's very rare for someone to have an inner voice that sort of, nobody calls themselves the villain, right? We're all just people, and we're all very confused and trying to make life work, and life is impossible to control, and so we all suffer when we try to control it. And so that's just my personal belief. I know everybody has sort of different opinions around consciousness, etc. But that is a core belief for me, and so it was really important to capture on the page. I get really depressed when I'm reading a book and it feels like the author fucking hates their character. I'm like, that's cool, but like, there's so much hate in the world already. Like, we're suffocating under it, and it just feels like it's everywhere and it's inescapable. And so, creating a place of love and unconditional love was really important for me.
Well, there's a real generosity of spirit in the book through all of the characters, so mission accomplished.
Thank you. It's still satire, don't get me wrong. We're laughing.
It's very funny.
But we're elbowing at the same time.
So you have a personal experience with debt, and you wrote about this in The Guardian, and there could be potentially many avenues you could have taken to explore this social issue. Why surrealist fiction like this? Is this just kind of the way your brain works and you just lent into it, or did you experiment or think about exploring this in a different kind of genre?
Yeah, I've always, this sounds so pretentious, I'm so sorry. I've always sort of thought of myself as like an artist, and when you're writing a novel, it's really important to think of it from the artist's perspective rather than the essayist's perspective. And for me, the novelist perspective is what is really interesting and what is really compelling. And so I wanted to take this sort of emotional experience that I've had and maybe my family members have had, and I wanted to examine it on a systemic level. I'm a really big fan of systems novels. they were really influential to me, especially when I was in my MFA program, because that's all you read in there. It's like Don DeLillo who, you know. So to me, it's always, you can never understand the issue until you make it personal, and you can never make it personal until you give an experience. Like, I could sit here and tell you what my life has been like, but you would never know what it is that I'm thinking or how I'm experiencing it or what my personal opinions on it are. And I'm kind of shy, so I really don't want to tell you, you know? Like, I don't want to tell you exactly how I felt every single moment, because that is how you find yourself in judgment, right? Other people are judging you. Fiction, to me, is one of the only ways that you can translate a reality that you can then discuss with other people. So when I am writing a book, really I'm trying to create a lived experience that will help you and another person bridge their lived experiences so that you have a language to discuss it. Maybe too ambitious of me.
Did you seek to create cultural change through this book in some way? Like, was there you're displaying and showing someone's experience or personal experience through fiction, but did you have a hope for maybe this book can change the way people think about certain things? Did you have an ambition in that sense?
I don't, nobody's ever listened to me.
Well, here we are.
Here we are. That's why I'm like, okay, guys, hello. I've always struggled with anger issues at the world, right? I grew up in a very rural, very red town. I went to a public high school that had sort of ACLU intervention for prayers on the intercom, and a lot of hate crime. And I always really, really struggled with how cruel the world could be. And I often felt very ignored in that personal and emotional struggle. I'm very sensitive. So I'm going to be real. I never thought anybody would care. But I really, really cared, and it was important to me to put it down on paper. And then when it was on paper, even though there are so many elements, right, that sort of are in parallel with my life, it took a lot of bravery then to go public with it, because it is extremely vulnerable. And the public sort of element of it and the public change that's come alongside with it has been really actually like deeply overwhelming to sort of experience, and just like nothing I could have ever imagined. I mean, at every step of my life, everyone except like my close friends have been like, okay, well, you gotta go to work. You have bills to pay, get on with it. So it's really nice to know that there are other people who struggle also.
Thanks for sharing that. I think that's going to be important for a lot of the writers in our audience to hear. And I think I want to ask about the surrealist elements of the book. So much of this book takes place in the dreams of other people. And I love hearing that the seed of this book came from your own dream, the transcription of a dream. How much of a role did your unconscious play in the drafting? Did you use any techniques like automatic writing? How much of your own dreams were you transcribing for this book?
The whole thing came to me in a dream, so I would say the entire thing is a transcription of a dream. If that's, I know that's really weird. So one of the reasons I started writing is because when I was a teenager, I had really, really bad insomnia, and my pediatrician was like, you have got to stop trying to force yourself to go to sleep. That just never works. It's going to make you worked up. It's going to make you anxious, and you're going to sit there and not get any rest. So what I would like for you to do instead is find something you can do in the dark. And so something that I could do in the dark was type little stories on my phone. So that's how I sort of started writing at a really young age. And when I was writing this book, I revisited sort of that method of generative. I was at a really low point. It was 2020. My mom had just passed away. My first book was not going to sell because of the economic sort of market. I was like getting evicted from my house, random story. Because a pastor wanted to live there. Shady. I hope he's in God's favor right now. But so I was laying in bed next to my partner, and I was awake, and my partner was asleep, and I was like, I want to get rest, but I cannot go to sleep right now. And that is when that's one of the ways that I started writing it. I think I wrote the first draft like on my phone in the early sort of like 3 a.m., 2 a.m. And that is a very surreal period of time. And I personally find life very surreal. So I think for me, the surrealism that other people have picked up on just feels really intrinsic to being alive. It's so strange. It's in California, like tech billionaires are starting to buy up all the water. Sir? Like that's, to me, that is so surreal.
Yeah.
Like that is so, why are we letting that happen? You know, like there are so many parts of life that are like that. There's so many coincidences. There's so many strange overlaps. There's so much sort of defiled logic in the way things work. So I really wanted to capture that because I felt like not a lot of contemporary fiction went into that space, which for me, growing up lower income, when you are low income, that is how the entire world works. Like something happens to you and then you have to respond. And then your response like brings horrible things upon you and then you have to respond to those horrible things. And it's just sort of like a never ending process. So I am less depressed now, but I still think the world kind of works like that.
In our Salon interviews, one of my favorite things is to hear how books come to being, and to hear that you typed this on your phone in the night, working in your sleep, and wrote a character who goes to work when he goes to sleep is fascinating. And I'm curious, in a book that came so much from this strange, almost sleep state, how much conscious plotting was happening?
I do several drafts for my work. So even though the first draft was sort of generated in this in-between state, which is how I kind of prefer to do my generative drafts because I have a really intense inner critic. So when you're very sleepy, sometimes that helps your brain shut up. But I did I think 7 drafts for this book. And in each draft, I worked on a different component. So, one draft I really focused on voice, and on one draft I really focused on sort of character mechanics and interaction. And on another draft, one of my favorite things that books do is they have big reveals. So I did a whole draft working on reveals and information and timing. And I think it's really hard to create a book if you're trying to do all of those things at once. Because we can really get in our heads, right? We want the perfect sentence, we want the perfect timing. Irony is really important to me as a writer. Sometimes I read a draft after I've written it and I'm like, what are you doing? So having different sort of focus drafts, different methods of drafting for each draft that I went through was really, really helpful for me in making sure that I hit all of the components and layerings that I wanted to hit.
And can I ask, how long did it take from that when you pulled that story out of the drawer through the 7 drafts to handing it over? What was that time frame like?
I think I was in grad school in 2017, I think. And that was when I first wrote it. And then I put it away and I didn't think about it for a long time, which is an important part of my process. I think the subconscious is really a marvelous thing and actually a complete horror. It's both. So I didn't think about it again for 3 years. And I think not thinking about it for 3 years is actually one of the reasons it was so helpful for me, because when I came back to it, I realized, even though I didn't realize I wasn't thinking about it, I actually had been thinking about it the whole time. And so I came to a lot of answers, and I was able to write the first draft in a year, and then I had a very grueling schedule where I did the next 5 drafts in a year and a half. And then we went out with it, and when my editors came back with questions, that's when I did sort of the 6th and the 7th draft.
Wow. At any point throughout those years, were you tempted to put it away forever? Like any Dark Night of the Soul moments where you thought, I'm just going to give up, this isn't happening?
Okay, this is a character flaw. I don't give up. Probably should. It would save me a lot of time. But I did have some really intense moments where I was like, this sucks ass, and why did I do this? And I can't believe I put myself in this position. There was like a period of time where I had a day job at the same time. So I was waking up at 6, writing till 9, going to work, and then from 6 to 9 writing again. And it was just so lonely and so intensive, and it was just like during a horrible time. And so there were definitely some moments. At the time I didn't have an office, so I worked in my closet. I would be typing around all my dresses, and I would be like, you're a dumb bitch. But now here we are. So my inner critic is usually wrong.
So what kept you going though? Like were there any other writers you were leaning on? And there was something, I mean, it sounds like there's a tenaciousness to you, you don't give up, but was there anything else that helped keep you going?
When I was younger, I wasn't good at anything. Like I didn't have any skills. I kind of like was sarcastic. My beautiful Southern relatives found me very disrespectful. They were right. And I had a hard time sort of, in the South, everything is very gender segregated. And I had a very hard time fitting in with the other girls in my age group. So the only thing I've ever had any talent in is storytelling. And really, since a very young age, I have just put all my eggs in one basket. And so I cannot set down the basket. I'll have nothing else. So it's really like, at the worst moments, it was like, I've been doing this for 10, 12 years at this point with single-minded sort of focus. And if I give up now, that invalidates all of those 12 years of focus and sort of sacrifice. And I was just completely unwilling to do that, especially because a lot of the things I had sacrificed was spending time with my mom, who had passed away. And so it suddenly felt very, very important to me to make sure that all of those sacrifices would eventually pay off for my family. Maybe TMI?
No, not at all. That's beautiful. I mean, I think as writers we need something that keeps us going. Especially if someone here and maybe they don't have anyone that's saying, hey, where's that book? Is it done yet? We need something to fuel us. And so really glad you shared that. Thank you.
I also recommend guys printing out weird pictures of your favorite authors and keep them in a little drawer. And then when you feel bad, just look at the picture and be like, well, okay, if that motherfucker can do it.
This is an excellent writing tip.
Yeah.
And how lucky are we that you stuck with it, because this book is so funny and so powerful. So thank you, Molly.
Thank you.
Yeah. So time check, we probably got about maybe 7 more minutes or so, then we'll turn over to audience questions.
Yeah, I'd say you have like 1 or 2 questions left in you.
Cool. All right, great. Okay, where do we go from here?
Thank you, Jules.
No problem.
So, yeah. Okay, we have to pick a couple.
Oh, scary.
You go.
I have
You
one.
pick one and I'll pick one.
Okay.
Yeah, cool.
So you teach undergrad
Yes.
at Columbia.
Yes.
What is the piece of writing your advice you find yourself giving most often to your students? Or what do you really want to impart to the writers that you teach?
I think a lot of writers, it's such a long path to becoming a writer. And there are so many people who want to tell you there are rules. There are no rules, except for grammar, which you can always subvert later if you have poetic intent. But there is no real rule. There's only stuff that people say you should or shouldn't do. And I think the real trick to becoming a writer is to know what type of reader you are. What do you respond to as a reader? What do you like? What type of books move you? Do you like dream sequences? Do you like it when books are funny? I personally have a very hard time with snobbish books. I'm like, all right, so why should I care about this? But I love very difficult books. So the only difference is, like, a snobbish book is a difficult book done badly. So I think you have to connect with what type of reading you like, what type of responses you have, because your only guide as a writer is yourself. And no one knows the answers of how to do it. Now, they will ask you to pay them a lot of money, so they will tell you, and I did pay them a lot of money. And that advice was good because it helped me realize what I thought, and realizing what you think and what your opinions are, and whether you think someone's full of shit or not is actually like the most important sort of thing you can develop as a writer, because it's really about developing your own taste.
Wonderful. So I'm curious, what do you know now as a published author that you didn't know before you were published? And kind of the context for this is, so many people, maybe people here, they see this mountain of like, having a book published. And I'm curious, now you're at this mountain of sorts. What's the perspective now that you didn't quite understand before? Maybe positive, negative, neutral?
I think the whole time I was so focused on a goal that I didn't think about what came after. And so for my advice for writers who either have a book coming out or want to go on submission is that you really need to give yourself emotional grace. The feelings that you are going to experience during the process are not going to be the experiences and feelings that your friends have, and they're not going to be what you think they are. So after my book came out, my friends who are moms sort of joke with me. They're like, you went through really severe postpartum depression. And I was like, I did, because this thing that had just been with me and for me was suddenly with and for everyone else. And they all had their own personal experiences with it. And it felt so strange to move into that spot. So something I wish I would have done earlier is, like, as soon as I started the submission process, I wish I would have started a journal, because the whole thing is so, I don't want to say degrading, but it is deeply, deeply vulnerable. You have one side of it that's doing it as a business, right? They're trying to sell. And then your side of it is an emotional expression, an art form. And so one of the only sort of ways to stay sane is to recognize that there's going to be a huge gap between what your publishers want, or what your agent wants, or what, if you're trying to get an agent, what those agents are looking for, and what it is you're creating. And it's very, very hard to sort of like hold on to your intentions and follow your path.
That's great. I have one cheeky last question. So you're working on something now. You don't have to tell us about it. But I'm curious, what's one thing you're doing similar as this book when you approach the writing? And what's one thing you're doing differently because it's either working better or it didn't work the first time?
So now I'm very lucky, and I get to have, my job is to write. And so instead of ruining my hands by sort of typing on my phone, I hand wrote the draft of the next project that I'm working on, and I actually just finished transferring it all to sort of a word processor. And I'm about to move into my sort of, I call my handwritten draft a zero draft because I can't face it, I'm like, this one does not count. So I'm like in a half draft right now, and something I'm doing differently is I had to figure out how to write a book the first 2 times. And I was very frustrated with myself for not knowing. And now this time I'm like, okay, each book is very different, and it's like each time you have to relearn how to write the project that you're trying to do. And my teachers used to say that to me, and then I would roll my eyes because I would be like, that's a nice line, actually. Yeah, okay, where'd you get that? Everybody says that. Cliche. But no, it turns out it's true. and so giving myself sort of the grace to fail and the grace to be a learner and to always sort of try to stay curious rather than negative. Now, I'm not always good at it, but it is sort of like, I think every day I'm practicing that. And I'm really lucky my partner is here and they really, oh yeah, that's you. And they are really, really helping me sort of to step into confidence and self-acceptance.
Well, thank you to you. Writers all need that loving writer friend in our corner.
Yes.
And you have been that for all of us here today and sharing your wisdom and your insights. So thank you, Molly, so much for this. We're going to open it up to questions. So let's see, we'll try to get, how much time do we have for questions about?
Like 15 minutes.
Okay, perfect. So we'll get through as many as we can. And yeah, I can choose. Hello.
Hi, Molly. I'm Anita, as you know. I am
What's up, Anita?
I speak to so many writers who say they had a horrible experience as a child learning how to write. And you said that your family was supportive. I'm wondering what your writing instruction in school was like.
We're just going to repeat the
Yes,
question
for the
for
live
the
stream.
friends on the live stream. So the question was about what your writing instruction in school was like.
Right. So I was a horrible student. That's not a good one. And I had authority problems, which that's a personality thing. Like that's still there. So I think my parents thought it would go away, but it didn't go away. I actually broke my arm in kindergarten, my right arm. So when everybody else was learning how to write, I couldn't learn how to write. So I didn't actually learn how to write until I was in 3rd grade when we were learning cursive. I sort of knew, but I wasn't adept at it. I couldn't write very much until 3rd grade. And it was a real struggle. I mean, I think I made D's and C's through all my English classes because my teachers were just like, you do not know how to write an essay. I think one of my teachers literally took me after class and he said, you are the most selfish person I've ever met and you have no idea how to express your inner thoughts. I have it memorized. And I was like, oh. And he was like, however, you have raw, unfiltered talent, which you will never be able to access because you have no discipline. And then I was like, oh, thank you, coach. He was a coach, of course he was. I was like, thank you, coach. I will think about that. And then I think I dropped out of that class. So my teachers didn't like me. You know, they were very religious elders, and I did not fit the sort of like, the things I wanted to write about were weird. My interests were macabre. Sort of the things I was reading were really strange. And when I was writing essays, I would try to be funny and people were like, this is a cry for help. So my school experience was not good, but I also think that's just kind of like the American education system.
We hear so many stories about teachers who were the bright spot that like kept you going, but it sounds like for you it was just sheer tenacity.
I had one really good teacher, and he was my creative writing teacher. Great guy, and when I was in high school, he heard that I wasn't planning to take the ACT, because in the South at the time, he took the ACT, not the SAT, and he actually paid for me to go take the ACT, and I didn't show up. And then he paid for me to take it again. And then he sent an essay I wrote in his class to a recruiter at a school in Vermont that I ended up going to. So the only reason I'm sitting here talking to you today is because James Dittish, shout out, he lives in Turkey now, he was like, okay, you're a little freak, but you're good. And I was like, okay, thanks. And then he was really like, I only have one class that I took with him, but I would say that his influence changed the entire trajectory of my life.
That's really beautiful.
Thank you, James. Maybe
Thanks,
watching
James.
from Turkey, who knows? Any other questions? Yeah, let's go. Yeah.
Yes, I have a question. First, prong of the question is, how is the editing process for this novel? Because it sounds like you have a really robust drafting system. And then my follow-up to that is, they mentioned you also edit sometimes. Do you approach editing other people's work differently than your own work?
Right.
Yes.
So
I'll let you
repeating,
repeat.
what,
Yes,
is
that's a
the,
lot to
what was
repeat.
the editing process like, and how do you approach editing your own work versus other people's work?
Right. So I at my day job back when I was suffering was an editor, and so I do have a very robust drafting process. And I would say my editorial work for this book to come out was not like some authors I think have really intense editorial work, but for me, I went into it with so much intention. I actually have a really great editor in the UK, Kashani. She's amazing. She's at Fourth Estate. And she really helped me, not because she edited me on the line level, but because she placed like 3 or 4 questions in the manuscript. And when I got to those questions, her asking them helped me understand what it was that I was trying to do. Every person needs a different type of editor because every person is a different type of writer. There are some people who need an editor that sends an email every week that's like, where are my pages? You're late. And then there are the type of editors who go in and line edit. And then there are editors who do structural edits. That's when you sort of like look at a manuscript overall and you say, there's this thing about it and this thing about it, and I feel like you're trying to connect them, but they're not connected. How can we make that bridge? So it's really like, I'm a teacher now, and editing is a lot like teaching. Each student requires a different set of conversations or notes or sort of encouragements or even criticism to reach their full potential. And an editor has a huge amount of responsibility because it's up to them to sort of intuit what that writer needs and come to them as they are, rather than expecting the writer to come to them.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Cool. So I wanted to talk about what you had mentioned about your teacher. So I think I've told you this, but when I hand sell your book, I tell people to read the acknowledgments first because I think it gets like a really good sense of like who you are. And I feel like it's one thing to write a book, but it's another to write the acknowledgments. And I guess I was wondering like what that was like for you and like how you came to do it in the way that you did it.
So,
First of all, how cool to talk about have someone hand selling your book.
Thank you.
A bookseller here at Books Are Magic just shared that when they hand sell Molly's book, they encourage people to read the acknowledgments first because it gives you a sense of Molly. What was the question after that? I was so
And then the
engrossed.
question was, how did I approach writing the acknowledgments, and why did I choose to write the acknowledgments as they are, which they are untraditional. And my answer is that I was a worker first, and I was a book worker first. When I was 18, that's when I started working at a little tiny indie called McSweeney's. And from there, I've worked on a lot of books. And one of the things that I've seen is that to make a book takes so many people, and so many of those people are never acknowledged. They never get, even the author usually doesn't even know they worked on the book. Like I can't tell you, I remember talking to Carmen Maria Machado when I was like a baby. And I was like, I loved working on your short story. And she's like, who are you? And I was like, oh, that's right, because all the emails went through my boss. And so I worked on the story like as an intern, and then I gave it to someone else, and they gave it to someone else, and they gave it to my boss, and then they gave it to Carmen. And so I was very familiar with the ways that a book can impact all those invisible people. And I wanted to sort of create a type of capital for those workers who worked on my book. And so for me, I chose to put the acknowledgments only in the first edition hardcover. And we're actually going into the paperback printing, and I had them remove them because I want it to be like the people who worked on that book initially, who got their comp copies, who were able to take it home, who believed in it before anybody else believed in it. I hope I can do something for them later, like I can make a career so that if they want to let that book go one day, they can make their money back and their time back. Now that's very ambitious. I don't know if I'll be able to do that, but that is my goal. And I wanted to give credit to everyone who works on it. And for me, since it was my first book, that also meant giving credit to my teachers. And I've had a lot of teachers.
That is a beautiful answer to a very beautiful question.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So something I love that you've taught me is the myth of the 9-to-5 workday as mythologized by Stephen King. Can you speak to how you push against that in your writing process?
I can interpret this question because I know what it's about. My beautiful friend and author, Melissa Lozada Oliva. Did I say that right, Melissa?
Yeah.
I've never said your last name before.
Thank you for saying it.
I'm just always like, hello, Melly. Who wrote an amazing book, Candelaria, which is, I think of it like if you loved soaps, watching soaps with your grandmother, and you also love apocalypse stories, it is a literary apocalypse soap, and you have to pick it up. It's so good. And Melissa and I talk about writing a lot, and one of the things we talk about is how these dude bro writers, they're out here being like, I worked on my manuscript every day for 8 hours. You're like, no, you did. How? What do you mean, how? You sat down at your desk for 8 hours and you worked on it? A lot of writing gets done outside of the page, in the emotional realm, in the interpersonal realm, when you're washing dishes, when you're thinking of a problem, when you're taking a shower. And you, as a writer, have to know yourself and your process. And all of us have an ideal process, right? All of us have the type of writer we want to be. And when I started out writing, I did want to be the type of writer who could pound out 3,000 words in a day. That is not the type of writer I am. I'm about 200, 250. Sometimes if I'm really lucky, I'll get to 500. But if I do 500 in a day, usually I get really depressed for 4 days and I don't write. So it ends up being worse. You have to get to know yourself and your limitations. And you have to create a writing schedule that accommodates who you actually are rather than the idealized version of yourself.
Thank you so much for that question. And I think we are at time. Do we have... Sorry, Pepper. So maybe you can ask it personally.
I'll be here.
And so Molly's going to do some book signings.
Yes.
Is that right? And
I got a little speech.
Okay, great.
All right, let's all clap. Thank you for being here. Thank you all for coming out on Monday night. If you're still on the live stream, you can get copies of Jonathan Abernathy, You Are Kind, and the link in the description. Read it. It's so good. So we're gonna be signing right over where Mike is. Mike is gonna wave and point to where Molly will be. So please form a line in the center aisle. And if you're gonna get up, please grab all of your belongings. We like to clean up right away and start to move the tables to the store for tomorrow. So thank you again.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Picture Magic, for having us, everyone watching. And yeah, hopefully this was helpful for writers in the room. And London Writers Salon, we do this every week. This has been amazing, Molly. So hopefully we're going to be able to extract the audio and publish it on a podcast as well. And also, if you are looking for fellow writing friends, there's a couple faces I recognize here in the room. We host something called Writers Hour. It's every day. It's free for anyone who wants to attend. 4 times a day, 8 a.m. London, 8 a.m. New York, 8 a.m. LA, and 8 a.m. Melbourne, Australia. We write together in silence, and there's about 200-300 people in a room all writing together on a Zoom room. So you all are invited. It's writershour.com or London Writers Salon. All right, that's enough. Let's do some signings. Thank you so much for being here.